Now we're ratcheting up the energy here, and our next keynote was a great conversation right off the start that I had with Clark here. And Clark Miller is a distinguished researcher focused on science, technology, and globalization. His expertise lies in the analysis of knowledge systems for policymaking and governments of emerging technologies. Miller has published extensively on science and technology policy and currently leads research on social dynamics of energy systems changes. He co-authored The Practices of Global Ethics and edited several notable works, including Changing the Atmosphere, the Handbook of Science and Technology Studies. And Miller is also involved in leading research initiatives in energy and sustainability, including projects in the quantum energy and sustainable solar technologies Engineering Research Center and the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network. That's a lot. It's, Clark is doing quite a bit of things, and so we're really excited to have Clark Miller talking about energy and carbon leadership for a thriving Arizona.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here. As Lauren whispered in my ear, when you get to be my age, part of what you accumulate is a long list of stuff that you've done. What I've been focusing on, though, for the last 5 years or so is spending a lot of time, thinking about large-scale transformation of our energy systems here in Arizona, around the country, and around the world. So I want to talk today specifically about the challenge here in Arizona and how we can think about energy and carbon as a unique opportunity for not only Arizona to be a leader in driving changes that need to happen all around the world, but also how we can take advantage of this opportunity to really bring a lot of benefits here to the state. And a fair bit of what I'm going to talk about is based on this report that we did, published a little over a year ago, called Pathways to a Carbon Neutral Arizona Economy. And if you want to link to it, you can use the QR code and find your way to the report, but I also want to put that report in context. And so the first thing I want to do is give you a little number. So $20 billion. Anybody have any idea what $20 billion represents? What's that? Carbon credit? Yeah, not quite, but close. Yeah?
I was going to say something about the Inflation Reduction Act.
The Inflation Reduction Act, that's another good guess. This is probably small for an Inflation Reduction Act program. They tend to be in the $100 billion range. This is Arizona's carbon tax in 2020. So you say, wait a minute, we don't have a carbon tax in Arizona, the way we normally think about a carbon tax. But we do have a carbon tax in the sense that we spend money every year, all of us, we go to the bank and we withdraw cash from the bank and literally we set that cash on fire. No, we don't. We send that cash out of state to oil companies all over the world, in places like Texas and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and elsewhere, and we buy carbon from them. And we import that carbon into Arizona, and then we set it on fire. Right? So you might as well have just set the cash on fire in the first place. As far as the Arizona economy is concerned, this is a net loss every year of roughly 5% of the value of the Arizona economy. So we have an economy that's about a $350 billion economy each year. And we take $20 billion of the net proceeds of that economy every year, and we ship it out of state, and we never see it again. So it literally is a 5% tax on the Arizona economy to buy carbon. And so what I want to sort of just start this conversation with is, what if instead we took that money and we invested it in locally owned, locally generated, carbon neutral energy right here in Arizona? Then instead of a 5% tax on our economy, it would be a 5% annual investment in the growth of the Arizona economy. So I continually am surprised by the lack of folks in Arizona who talk up the opportunity that we have to turn a 5% tax, which most people in Arizona hate. We don't like taxes in this state, and turn it into a 5% investment, which we claim at least to like. Right? This is what the opportunity in front of us is. It's one piece of the opportunity. I'll talk about some other pieces of the opportunity too. So I want to talk about getting to carbon neutrality here in the state. I want to talk about the fact that we can do this. It's not actually terribly hard for us to get to carbon neutrality. There's some pretty simple pieces of the puzzle that we have to work our way through. I'll talk about what those are. I'll talk about the benefits that will come, and they go beyond the kind of macroeconomic benefits quite substantially. And then I want to end by talking about how we do it. Because the reality is that the big questions in front of us today are not actually whether we're going to continue fossil fuels or go green. The big questions in front of us today are which version of a green energy future we're going to build here in Arizona. And those design choices are fairly substantial, and they're fairly consequential. And so I want to put some of those on the table for us to think about here this afternoon. So we can do this. Let's get excited. Let's not be fearful, as the morning panel discussed about this. Let's take this as an opportunity that we have for moving forward, and let's all get excited about it, and let's all get engaged in this. So here's where we are. These are carbon dioxide emissions from the state of Arizona. By and large, these are our greenhouse gas emissions. We do not have very much in the way of methane emissions. We are not a methane-producing state. We do not have very much in the way of nitrous oxide emissions. We're not a big agricultural state, unlike some of our neighbors, right? So by and large, energy-related carbon dioxide emissions are what we have here in the state of Arizona. And where we are is that we're down 20% from the peak. The peak was in about 2008. That was the national peak as well. I'll show you why we're down about 20%. But it's also important to know, because this is Arizona, and we are growing fast, and we have grown fast since 2008. And we continue to grow fast as we build 2 giant new semiconductor manufacturing facilities. If you've driven south on the 10, on your left, there's a giant new construction site that Intel is building, a big $20 billion new chip manufacturing facility. And if you drive on I-17 going north and you look on your left, there's another giant construction site. That's TSMC's new chip manufacturing plant. We are the epicenter. Do not ask me why. We already have a substantial fraction of the world's chip manufacturing right here in Phoenix, Arizona. I grew up in the age of atomic bombs on nuclear missiles, and, you know, situating 60% of the world's chip manufacturing in one urban area is not a very smart thing from a global security standpoint, but we've decided to do it. Right? We are also, and I'll show you this later, a centerpiece of a bunch of other kinds of manufacturing growth that are happening. So we're growing really fast. So when you look at this in absolute terms, we've dropped 20%. But when you look at it relative to the size of the economy and the population of the state, we've dropped 33% in our CO2 emissions. So we are already well on our way, and that includes the post-COVID resurge in our energy consumption. So this data goes through 2021, but 2022 is not terribly different from where we were in 2021. The interesting thing, because I was like, wait, how does this look if you look elsewhere? So I looked to our west, to California, which is known as a national leader. They are down 20% on their greenhouse gas emissions since 2008. So we are right in parallel with the state of California. Not something you would think if you just looked at the national news, which looks at California as like the place that's doing all things climate change, and Arizona as this weird backward neighbor that only kind of sort of gets things. But we're moving in the right direction, and we're moving in the right direction on a pace that is not dissimilar from that of others around us. So here's why our emissions have fallen dramatically, and that is, that graph up there is coal emissions, again, since, in this case, 2001. And you can see that after 2013, coal emissions from Arizona power plants dropped dramatically. And that included a significant drop prior to the closure of Navajo Generating Station, which was at the end of 2019. And it has included another significant drop since the closure of Navajo Generating Station. So that we're now down 56% in terms of our overall coal emissions. And that includes the effect of both closing power plants, which we have begun to do, and ramping down the use of coal-fired power plants because they're uneconomic in relationship to especially natural gas plants. You can see that we've a little bit increased our natural gas use. If you look at the numbers for the natural gas power plant line, which is the second line in the table, they've gone up about 16%. Transportation emissions have gone up by about 6% since 2008. And since 2008, we've added 11 terawatt hours of annual solar production. About 2/3 of that is utility scale, and 1/3 of that is rooftop power plants. And that comes out, the rooftop part of that alone comes out to about a 0.5 kilowatt per person. So a typical rooftop system is sort of 5 to 7.5 kilowatts. So a 0.5 kilowatt per person is a substantial fraction of the rooftops in the state now have solar on them. And that part of the production has been growing faster than the utility scale production over the last 5 years. So those of us who are buying systems and putting them on our roofs are outpacing the utilities, even though from a cost perspective, everybody says, well, utility scale is the cheapest. And so that will go the fastest, and that's the stuff we should pay attention to. No, it turns out that people make different calculations than companies do. And for the people of Arizona, it makes a lot of financial sense to put solar on your roof. So here's what that looks like when you bucket it into the buckets of emissions that we talked about in the report that was on the front page. The white plus the green represents where we were in 2018. The green represents gains, like reductions in emissions. Since 2018, you see that that is almost entirely in the coal sector. The red represents places where we've seen growth, and that's mostly in the natural gas power plants. But you can also see thin red lines on cars, heavy transport, and industrial emissions. They've gone up a little bit since 2018. So this is sort of next steps, right? And so the first big next step for the state to getting to carbon neutrality is to finish the job on closing our coal-fired power plants. And right now, the utilities in the state have made plans and announced plans to close all of the coal-fired power plants in the state by 2032. So assuming those plans get implemented as currently articulated, we will finish using coal to produce electricity in this state in a little less than a decade. So that's happening, and that's great, and it will reduce another 13.8 million metric tons of CO2 emissions from the state. The second sort of next step for us is to tackle light-duty automobile transportation. All the cars and trucks that you see and SUVs that you see driving around our streets. That needs to happen as fast as we possibly can transition, because that is now the largest source of CO2 emissions in the Arizona economy, and it's a place where we have a set of solutions that we can act on right now. The third area which we need to focus on is natural gas power plants. As you can see, that's where we've had the most growth in the past 5 years in terms of our CO2 emissions. That we need to think about how we minimize that growth going forward so that we do not continue to expand the CO2 emissions that come from natural gas power plants. The challenge in that particular piece of the puzzle is that those power plants are what stands between us and the rising problem of urban heat here in Arizona. We need a reliable electricity system. That needs to deliver huge amounts of electricity at a peak, which happens in June, July, and August in the early evening here on our grid. That's when we use the maximum electricity. And it needs to happen in a way that we have absolute conviction that that electricity is going to be there. And so those power plants at the moment are playing that role on the grid, and they're going to continue to play that role on the grid in the short term, whatever the short term means. So probably at least the next decade and maybe the next 2 decades, those power plants are going to continue to predominantly play that role. They will slowly be replaced by solar and batteries for part of it, but that part of it will never fully replace the need for gas peaking capacity on our grid until we can find an alternative solution that does a bunch of the things that gas peaking plants do on our grid. There's another piece of the puzzle which is late at night in the pre-dawn hours. Again, you don't have a lot of solar. The sun hasn't come up yet. Batteries are going to struggle to extend that late into the night, and so we're going to need to think about how we power all of these factories that are going to run 24/7, 365 around the valley. And if people start charging their electric cars, well, I shouldn't say if they stop, if they keep charging their electric cars in the middle of the night, and we grow the number of electric cars, that's going to be another late night kind of challenge for us to work on. And then there's these longer term kind of challenges which people are working on, right? Nicola's working on battery electric trucks to ship equipment to Los Angeles and the port. They're also working on hydrogen fuel cell trucks to do that kind of work. So they're beginning to roll those out. Those are expensive. The fuels are expensive for those. So we'll see how fast we get adoption in those spaces. And then there's a set of industrial and commercial and residential uses of natural gas. About half of that is industrial. That's mainly process heat, because these big manufacturing facilities need a lot of heat. To drive that heat, especially the high temperature heat, you need a fuel. At the moment, that fuel is natural gas. Again, potentially in the long term, you can replace that with a variety of strategies, from electrification to say, clean hydrogen. But we're still working on those, and they're still not economical today. So those pieces of the puzzle are a big part of what we call the sort of hardest 20% of the CO2 emissions to tackle, and they're the part that we will probably tackle last in our strategies. So that's sort of the next steps, right? The big next steps are making sure we finish the job on coal and accelerating EV adoption, electric vehicle adoption, as fast as we can on our grid, and minimizing growth in the natural gas sector. By the way, sorry, just there was a purpose to this slide. If we can take care of the first two of those, right, closing the rest of the coal plants and accelerating electric vehicle adoption in the state, that's another 44% of our CO2 emissions that we can eliminate. One thing I want to say, just as an aside, and this is as good a time to do it as any, CO2 emissions reductions are, they're not a win everything or lose everything proposition, right? If we get 90% of our CO2 emissions reduced, we've gotten 90% of our CO2 emissions reduced. That's 9/10 of the problem that we've solved, right? So if, there's both there's a lot of focus on we have to get to zero. And we do have to get to zero from a long-term climate change perspective. But if we get to zero in 2045, or we get to 10%, 90% reduction by 2045, and we get to zero in 2050, the differences between those two are pretty minor from a climate change perspective, right? Getting to 90% as fast as we can is a really kind of important goal. Getting to 100%, we need to get there. But getting 90% is 9/10 of the way there. That's a big win, right? So that's an important kind of piece of this puzzle to think about. Every emissions that you reduce is an emission that you reduce that doesn't go into the atmosphere, right? And so each one is a win on our way to 100% carbon neutrality. So I talked a little bit about the coal-fired power plants. On electric vehicles, the good news, I will say, is that we have a bunch of them now, 66,000 of them as of last December. Judging by numbers that have been reported in the news, we probably have another 30 or 40,000 already in 2023, so we're probably somewhere close to 100,000 electric vehicles at the moment. Not where we need to get to by any stretch of the imagination, but that puts us number 7 per capita. By size of the economy, we are the 15th largest state. By population, we're the 18th largest state. So being number 7 in EV adoption is not a bad thing. We are out in front as a leader in that space, and I think that we can go even faster here for a variety of reasons. In terms of accelerating EV adoption. But we need to think about how we do this, right? And we need to think about how we make sure that we continue to be a leader as a state. And so if there are creative folks out there who are trying to figure out what they can do to make a difference here in the state tomorrow, the answer is think about how you can help your neighbors, your friends, your community, the city of Phoenix, the city of Tucson, figure out how to make EV adoption go a little bit faster. What are those things that are limiting that? How can we spread the story of the benefits? What we know is that in many parts of the world, when you cross a threshold of about somewhere between 5 and 10% of new vehicle sales going to electric, that you often get a very rapid adoption after that and a very rapid escalation. We have seen that happen in Norway. We are now seeing that happen across the European Union as countries shift above that 10% level. We have seen it happen in California as well, which is now at something like 25% EV adoption. Nationwide, we're now at 10% of EV sales, including California, which buys a lot of cars. And here in Arizona, we were at, in January, 9.5%. So we may be higher than that now. But the answer is we're at that threshold. And so there is this opportunity for us to accelerate, but there's also a growing concern that in parts of the United States, which lean right on the political spectrum, that we are not seeing the same kind of uptick in electric vehicle adoption that we are seeing in places that lean left on the political spectrum in this country. And of course, we all know Arizona sits right squarely in the middle of that spectrum as a purple state. And so I think it's important that we focus on the value and benefits of electric vehicles here in this state. So we can do this. We have a set of strategies that are in place. We know how to take the next big steps that will get us another big chunk of our carbon dioxide emissions reduced here in the state. And I will also say it's important to know that all of our institutions at this point are working on this puzzle, all the big important institutions in the state. And that includes especially the big cities, which have all been leaders on this. Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, Tempe are all active leaders in this space. Our utilities have all made substantial pledges that are close to carbon neutrality pledges. If they're not 100% carbon neutrality pledges, some of them are. So we are moving in the right direction in this state, but I will say it's also going to take a lot of work, and that's partly why it's important for this audience especially to understand that we can do this in this state and to get engaged and to get involved and to go to work for institutions that are making positive change. If we do that, the benefits will be substantial, and I just want to quickly run through a few of them. I think almost all of us in this audience are aware of the sort of climate benefits. We are pushing above that second black line into what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change calls the danger zone, right? The yellow zone in which we begin to see substantial climate change impacts occurring. We have begun to see those, especially if you look at the second column from the left. Those are risks associated with extreme weather events. That's what we call last summer's heat wave, which we understand caused significant challenges of various kinds, led to deaths, et cetera. So we are definitely beginning to see ourselves moving into that danger zone. The faster that we can reduce our carbon emissions, the better off we will be in terms of not continuing to move upwards on this graph. There will be substantial economic benefits. I mentioned earlier that chips are not the only thing that we manufacture in this state. In the last few years, we have added a whole bunch of new manufacturing capability around Phoenix and in Tucson and in other parts of the state. Casa Grande has benefited significantly from this. People who are manufacturing hydrogen trucks, people who are developing direct air capture technologies, people who are manufacturing batteries, people who are manufacturing electric vehicles. And of course, First Solar has had its global headquarters here in Tempe across the river for a very long time, from which they run power plants all over the world. If you've ever seen their control room, it's a really amazing space where they run and manage those solar power plants. And of course, they are actively growing not their Arizona manufacturing, but their US solar panel manufacturing business at the moment, looking for a new site for a second big factory that they're going to build. So a lot of economic benefits for the state coming out of this green energy transition. Financial benefits, I talked a little bit about the financial benefits in the macroeconomic sense. This is more of a microeconomic sense. The top chart is from the State Transportation Electrification Plan that the Corporation Commission asked APS and TEP, Tucson Electric Power, to commission. That study showed quite substantial gains. So in the medium adoption scenario, for electric vehicles, which sees us, we're at 100,000 now, I said, which sees us at 1 million vehicles sometime in the 2030 to 2035 time window. That scenario sees, for the state as a whole, $8.5 billion in financial benefits for individual participants. That means people who buy electric cars. And that's related to the bottom figure that you see there. And let me see. Nope, that was not the right button. This button, yeah, there we go. So this figure here, this shows you the annual savings. I plugged in the numbers. This is an EV savings calculator. I plugged in the current numbers for gasoline off the street this morning, and I plugged in the current electricity price. And so over 5 years, an electric vehicle will cost $7,000 less to fuel than a gasoline consumption vehicle. So you think about a 15-year lifetime of a vehicle, that's a $21,000 savings for the owners of that vehicle over that time period. So substantial financial savings that more than offset the initial cost of the vehicle. And in fact, we're seeing vehicle costs now begin to cross, where the internal combustion engine versions of the vehicle are roughly the same price as the electric versions of the vehicle. And that process of cost competitiveness is supposed to accelerate over the next sort of 3 to 5 years across a whole additional set of vehicles. So then there's the middle column on that table at the top, which is $10 billion of savings over the next, between now and 2040, so the next 17 years. That's to ratepayers. That's money that it costs less to generate electricity under these scenarios. That's benefits from electric vehicle adoption that go to the grid. And then if you add those two together and you add in health benefits from the fact that there's less air pollution, you get their total number, which is $25 billion in net financial benefits for the state of Arizona if we achieve that medium electric vehicle adoption scenario. This is a study that was done by the American Lung Association of EV adoption in Arizona. For Arizona, this transition could mean significant public health benefits, including $15 billion in public health, $15 billion in public health savings, 1,360 avoided deaths, 38,000 avoided asthma attacks, and 182,000 avoided lost work days over the next 17 years. So you think about those benefits and you see how this EV transition is not just about climate change. It's also about significantly reducing the energy burden on Arizona communities and households, and it's about the financial burdens, and it's about improving our health through lowering air pollution across the state. So I want to end this by just talking a little bit, though, about the choices that we have, right? So I've been talking about sort of fossil fuels versus clean energy, but the real choice, I like to say, because everybody has agreed that we have to figure out how to get off fossil fuels. The real choice is between clean energy future number 1, clean energy future number 2, or clean energy future number 3, right? And so it's those kinds of choices which I think we now need to begin also to focus on here in the state as we think about where we're going. And they matter a lot. These are big choices that confront us. And I like to put it even simpler. This is solar versus solar. We are going to have a solar future in this state, but there are lots of different possible solar futures that we could build. And the question is, which one do we want to build going forward? So let's start simple. To generate 50% of the state's electricity under some basic assumptions for 2050, we will need 70 gigawatts of solar energy. We are at about 7 gigawatts of solar energy at the moment in the state, so we build about 10% of what we need. That is 175 million solar panels that we need to put down somewhere in the state. That's a lot of solar panels. So one question that confronts us, and we see this question every day, where are we going to put all of those solar panels? Are we going to put them in cities, on people's rooftops, for example, or parking lots? If you add up just the parking lot space in Maricopa County, and you say, what if we shaded all of those parking lots with solar shade structures? Make all of us feel good in the summer, because we get to park our cars in the shade everywhere we go. Right? How much would that be? Well, it turns out 29 gigawatts. We would get nearly half of the solar that we need to power the state in a clean energy future, and all we have to do is cover our parking lots with shade structures. Right? So we have a great opportunity to build solar in cities. I haven't even put any on rooftops in that model. Right? We still got all those rooftops. Right? And we could still do shade structures in parks for the kids so that they can play under them. Right? So there's all kinds of opportunities in cities, but we also know we could put these power plants out in the desert. Right? Or on farmland, that's marginal farmland, that at the moment is, we heard, growing water-consumptive crops that really don't have a lot of economic or, for that matter, food system value in our economy, right? We could replace, and we indeed are already. If you go down to Gila Bend, you'll see a bunch of solar, big utility-scale solar plants down in Gila Bend. Those are all on marginal farmland that was changed over to solar, because the landowners get more money renting to solar plants than they do growing crops here in the desert, right? Remember, it's a desert. So there's lots of opportunities to put solar in other parts of the state as well. So this is a fairly substantial choice, because this is about which kind of world are we going to live in, right? Are we going to live in a world in which we have built, much like we do at the moment, a bunch of power plants outside of cities in rural communities, and ask those rural communities to essentially power our cities? That's what we've done with most of our power plants at the moment. Are we going to take ownership of these solar panels here in the cities and build them out that way? That's my fun fact. We can think about financial design choices as well. So each of those 175 million solar panels, over their 25-year lives, will produce a bunch of electricity. That electricity has an economic value to it. Whether you're replacing your own electricity consumption, or you're selling that electricity to the grid, or you're using that electricity for a new commercial facility, for example, that electricity has value over that 25 years. You subtract off the cost of making that panel and installing that panel, and the net worth of each panel is something like $1,000. So you can do the math. 175 million panels at $1,000 a panel is $175 billion worth of net economic value in the solar industry in Arizona in the future. So who gets that money? How do we divvy up that $175 billion pie? Right? That's a pretty substantial solar design question. This question routinely gets debated at the Arizona Corporation Commission, which writes the rules over who gets to own solar panels in Arizona, under what conditions, right? But they don't debate it in these terms. But this is the outcome question of all of those solar rules that are getting negotiated at the Corporation Commission, is who gets this $1,000 per panel, right? Right now, I get access to it because I own a house and I have enough money to buy solar panels and put them on my roof. So I'm netting my $1,000 per panel. I've got about 28 panels on my roof. That's a pretty good deal for me, right? So But lots of people in Arizona can't access solar adoption at the moment. And of course, a lot of this is owned in other ways, like through large utility scale power plants. And so you see this is a very real question about the future of political economy in the state. Questions like, are we going to provide a share of that revenue stream to Arizona's tribes? Open question at this point. A few of Arizona's tribes have historically benefited and not benefited, been harmed through energy production in the past. Navajo especially is what we call a resource tribe. They have a lot of carbon resources on their lands. They have exploited those historically for revenue streams, but they were also a massive site of uranium mining, which has created huge health issues on the Navajo Nation. Many of our other tribes have not historically benefited, but they have huge resources that turn out to be important in a renewable energy economy, like land. So question, opening up, are we going to make a political economy of solar in the future that provides financial revenues to our tribal communities, which are some of our most vulnerable, lowest income communities here in the state? Another design question is, how do we weave solar energy into the social, economic, and cultural fabric of Arizona life? I like to show this set of pictures because the pictures are identical, right? And it represents a kind of thought experiment, right? The same solar panels, same wires, same physical location, same neighborhood, somewhere in the Phoenix suburbs. Three very different futures for America, right? In the left-hand picture, you have what I call a libertarian solar energy future. Libertarians believe that each of us is our own little individual economic agent. So in this picture, you see individuals or households who own their own homes. And on top of those homes, they have purchased and own solar systems. And in that picture, they are engaged in buying and selling electricity from those solar panels to their electric utility, perhaps even through peer-to-peer sharing networks and markets in an individualized political economy. In the middle picture, I have a very different picture, very different future. I call this the neoliberal solar future. This is the future that is represented by Elon Musk. Elon Musk bought a company called Solar City about 5 years ago from his cousin. Solar City was engaged in what was called a leasing model, still is, Tesla still is, as are a number of other companies. In a leasing model, you kind of think about the contracts and you're like, people are leasing solar panels from Elon Musk. But it turns out that's not what's going on. What's going on is those companies own those solar panels. And they are leasing from you, the person who owns the house, the empty rooftop space. And so if you think about it, if you imagine, right, a Solar City or a Sunrun leasing panels on hundreds of millions of American houses, or leasing rooftop space from hundreds of millions of American houses, in exchange for, let's say, a $15 a month or a $30 a month rental payment, which is about what you get from a solar lease if you get solar on your rooftop that way. They're paying you $30 a month for your rooftop space, basically, right? Now imagine in this that you also have what we really have here in Phoenix, and it continually amazes me that this is true, but this neighborhood is not owned by homeowners in this middle picture. This neighborhood is owned by Wall Street banks who own tracts of houses in the Phoenix suburbs and rent them to homeowners, so rent them to renters, sorry. So the people living in these houses are paying rent to live in this house. And the the banks are then getting revenue payments from Solar City to rent their rooftop space to these solar owners. And Tesla, in this vision of the future, is the largest electric utility in the United States. If it's got, let's say 50 million houses with a 5 kilowatt system on those houses, they have more electric generation than any utility in the country, right? So this is a big corporation political economy of solar, but we still have individual rooftop systems, right? So it's an interesting kind of dynamic. In the third picture on the right, you have what I call a communitarian political economy. In this picture, you have a neighborhood that's partly homeowners, partly renters, and they have banded together in a neighborhood of energy co-op. These energy co-ops are really big in Europe right now. European law has incentivized the creation of neighborhood energy co-ops. And they have collectively put their money together and gone out and bought panels and installed those panels on neighborhood rooftops, and they share the revenue equally across all of the shareholders, all the people who rent in the neighborhood, all the people who own homes in the neighborhood. Everybody benefits, right? This is a community-based power future. All of these are possible. The third one happens to be illegal in Arizona at the moment. Again, go back to the Arizona Corporation Commission. The rules that they write really matter for who gets to own solar in which ways. And so it does matter which design choices we make about how to put solar down in our lives. That seemed to be in there twice. Okay. You'll recall that I also mentioned that there are these two buckets, the industrial bucket and the heavy transportation bucket, that we don't quite know what to do with yet. And there we also have a big question about the future of energy in Arizona, and that is, how do we tackle these really hard emissions, this final 20%, if you will. Again, you can go read the report if you want more details on this, but we looked at 3 technology options in our report, one of which is electrification, using electricity for everything. Another of which is what we call a new carbon economy. The idea is you capture carbon from the air, you reconfigure that carbon dioxide out of the air into a carbon-based fuel, and then you recycle it and you use it as a carbon-based fuel just the way we do carbon-based fuels today, right? So you create a kind of circular economy carbon market. And there's a lot of interest in this option in Arizona at the moment. In fact, we just won a Department of Energy grant to build a Southwest direct air capture hub, which will pilot test strategies for capturing carbon out of the air. We have just across the way the first direct air capture machine in Arizona installed on ASU's campus. You can go see it if you want. It captures carbon. It's really good at it. We then let the carbon back out into the atmosphere. Oops, dirty secret. Because we don't have anything to do with it at the moment. But I'm sure we will figure out what to do with it in the not too distant future. And then, of course, there's a hydrogen economy. Hydrogen is an extremely clean burning fuel because hydrogen, when you burn it in oxygen, which is the big component of the air that we breathe, right? You get water. Right? So it's an extremely clean burning fuel, especially in the form of a fuel cell, as opposed to combustion. So you can use a fuel cell. You can actually generate pure water this way. There are people that are trying to figure out how to take advantage of that. Problem being that producing green hydrogen, which is the sort of cleanest form of hydrogen where you use renewable electricity. By the way, it's really easy to make clean hydrogen. You just run an electric current through water, and off comes hydrogen. It's a really easy and simple process. It's just really expensive because that energy is expensive, the electricity to run through it. And so the big challenge for a hydrogen economy is figuring out how to make it affordable. So these are sort of the 3 big technology options for dealing with industrial emissions, heavy trucking, other kinds of, jet. How do we replace jet fuel with our big airplane fleets and so forth, right? These are the kind of big technology options. I will say the biggest and most important element that differs between the first one, electrification, and the second two is that the first one is the most efficient. Electric motors and electric heat pumps and electric other technologies are really efficient at converting the energy inside of them into the work that you need done. By contrast, if you have to make a fuel and then burn a fuel, you lose a lot of energy along the way. When we burn gasoline in our cars, we lose 2/3 of the energy. Only 1/3 of the energy in that gasoline goes into the wheels of our cars, which is why we save a lot of money if we go to a battery electric vehicle. We just are using the energy much more efficiently. So the difference between the first option up here and the bottom two options in a fundamental sense is that we need about 2, 3, maybe 4 times as much solar to drive a carbon economy or a hydrogen economy as we do an electric economy. So from the standpoint of how many solar panels do we have to put down in Arizona, the answer is go electric, as much as conceivably possible. But there may be things for which we just can't do electric. We don't know yet. We're still in the early phases of this. But the other point from a design option standard is that each of these three economies requires very different infrastructures for the future of Arizona, right? Hydrogen, we would need pipelines to be moving it around, right? A new carbon economy, we would need not only an infrastructure to capture the carbon, but then an infrastructure like a refinery to transform that carbon dioxide that we're pulling out of the air back into a recycled synthetic carbon fuel, right? So these choices come with big infrastructure choices. Of course, all of us care about infrastructure, right? Because we have to live next to this infrastructure. We have to deal with all of the environmental issues that come with different kinds of infrastructures. And all of these infrastructures will come with different kinds of environmental issues, whether it's land use, water use, pollution risks, et cetera. So these are real choices that we have for the future of the state. Then there's some others, a few other, as I say, hard questions. I won't spend a lot of time on these. But this is a real one, right? Who will get sacrificed to a clean energy transition in Arizona? Right? We know that energy systems come with sacrifice zones. So where are those sacrifice zones for each of these different kinds of futures? This is why building utility scale solar plants in rural communities is different from building solar systems in cities, because they come with different communities that have to live next to them and live with them and or benefit from them, right? And how do we address those risks? So that's an important question that we should grapple with. Will we choose to become a powerful energy exporter? All of the conversation I've had with you so far today has been, how do we get our economy to carbon neutral? But there's a whole country out there that has to get to carbon neutrality, and we have one of the biggest solar resources on the planet in this state. And so there are going to be a lot of places that are looking for Arizona to help them produce clean energy for the future. Do we want to become a Saudi Arabia, a Nigeria, a Venezuela of the future here in Arizona? Do we want to become that energy export location, the place that builds solar resources, builds hydrogen manufacturing resources for other people in other places? I will say we have gotten a taste with the controversies over using agricultural land in this state to produce stuff for other parts of the world in the last few years that suggests that we're a little leery of some of this idea. If it uses land, if it uses water in Arizona, and the benefit of that goes elsewhere. On the other hand, right, this is a big economic potential opportunity for the state to think about these things. Mining and minerals. All of these technologies use stuff out of the ground. The good upside is that they use only about 10% of the volume of stuff out of the ground as the current fossil fuel economy. So we get a huge win by shifting to renewables and clean energy. with respect to mining and minerals. On the other hand, they use different minerals. They use lithium, they use silver and copper. And we know what the growth of the world's copper industry has meant for the state of Arizona and its future already, because we're having a conversation about whether we build a copper mine at Oak Flat on historically Apache land, right? And those are the kind of real conversations that we have. This also plays into a set of national security conversations about whether we want to reshore that mining into the United States, into North America, or whether we want to continue to rely on a global mining industry and, in a sense, to export the environmental and human consequences of mining to other parts of the world, whether we want to insist that the mining industry not create sacrifice zones associated with its work, wherever it does that mining. These are real questions that we need to grapple with respect to a clean energy future in the state. And my favorite, just of late, is, will we charge our electric vehicles at noon or at midnight? Right now, we're charging them all at midnight. Like 90+% of our charging is happening at midnight. We're going to have a solar energy economy of the future. It makes no sense to charge your vehicles at midnight in a solar energy economy. We're going to have lots of cheap electrons in the middle of the day. But that means all of us who are going to become electric vehicle owners, or already are electric vehicle owners, are going to have to figure out, how can we charge our cars when the sun is shining? And that's a big lift. So if we really want to shift our thinking and become a kind of clean energy economy in the most economically and energetically and mineralogically efficient way, and charge our cars in the middle of the day, then it's going to take a big lift on all of our parts individually, but also institutionally, right? I mean, ASU is one of the biggest EV charging deserts on the planet. I'll just be blunt. It's really hard to charge your EV at ASU, and yet we claim to want to be part of a clean energy future in this state. So I think we're going to have to rethink here as an institution. Other big employers are going to have to rethink as institutions. We're going to have to figure out, how do we make daytime charging available if we want to go down that path going forward. So with that, let me just say, for all of you that are students in the room, this is your future, not mine. I'm nearing retirement. I am nearing the moment in time where I will become irrelevant to this conversation. It's you all that will be the ones who are building this future, who are making these choices about which direction we want to go. This is going to be your professional legacy, your professional life. And so I will say, put everything that you have into it. We can do it. The benefits will be huge if we do it, but we have some really big choices to make along the way. Thank you very much.